Let's fucking go. Cheers, bro. First podcast in the new
Cheers.
studio. Thanks for being here, man.
Proud to be here.
Let's go.
Yeah.
So you are on your second book right now. First one, Crypto Confidential, you had, big publisher, big name. And then you had to transition to this one, a fiction book, as self-publishing.
Yeah.
Self-published, which is fucking awesome.
Thank you.
I think I was very stoked for you with that. What are some dirty secrets that now that you're on the other side, publishers don't want you to know about?
So I take some issue with big self-publishing influencers who will say that, oh, publishers can't do anything. You're giving up 85% of your rights to the book or more often, and they're not going to do anything. You're going to do all the work. Because the reality is a publisher can do a lot of work. If a publisher thinks a book has a high chance of being their moneymaker for the year, because it's really only going to be like one or two books that make most of their revenue for the year, they can really push that book. They can get it into bookstores, and people who do shop in bookstores or who look at the lists and whatnot, that does drive a lot of book sales. But you have to be the book that they choose to really push out there in a given year. And so there really is this, I think, truth to this idea that if you can't get a massive advance, it's almost not worth going with a publisher anymore, because it's sort of like that adage that if you owe the bank $1 million, it's your problem. If the bank owes you, or if you owe the bank $1 billion, it's the bank's problem. If a publisher gives you a $25,000 advance for your book, they're going to make more than that in a day from Atomic Habits sales, right? So they don't really care if they lose the 25 grand. If they give you a $2 million advance, they need that book to make back that money, or else somebody is getting a call or getting in trouble, right? And so when you start to get into those tiers of advances, there is a lot a publisher can do. They're not these incompetent people that the self-publishing crowd makes them out to be sometimes. But most people don't get those advances. And even if you get those advances and they are trying to get it out, there is still a certain amount of it that's outside of your control. So I was in this interesting area with Crypto Confidential where I got a great advance. So it was $275K, which is fantastic. And so they were able to warm up a lot of leads, and they were able to get books out to some pretty cool spots, right? There was a potential New York Times book review. There was a New York Post article. Apparently Bill Maher's people were reading it and were pretty interested. There were all these things that felt like they could have turned into something really, really strong. And basically none of them did. And I mean, we could come up with a few reasons for that. One could be that when it came out, crypto was super dead. Nobody was talking about crypto. It was we were, the SBF stuff had happened, and then there had been this uptick in interest in October of 23 with SBF's trial. And that's when Michael Lewis's book came out. And so there was a lot of interest then. And then crypto really fell off for the next year or so until fall of 24, when we had that kind of first leg of this bull run that you want to call it. Yeah. And so I was publishing a few months before that, when everything was dead, prices were really low, nobody was interested. And so on the one hand, media wasn't that interested in talking about it. And then on the other hand, I didn't get the big anchor piece that makes all of the other media people want to talk about it or want to feature it. And that was something I learned going through the process that I didn't know about before, but it feels very obvious once I say it, which is that a lot of mainstream media content is driven by what's popular and what's trending and what's a story that people are reading right now that you want to make sure you have a take on. So if you get the big Atlantic piece about the book, or you get the big New York Times book review or whatever, everybody else is going to want to talk about the book. Yeah. Because they don't want to have missed out on getting to talk about that. If you don't get that big anchor piece, none of the other things come through. And so it ended up being this very frustrating experience where we had all of these warm leads going into launch, and most of them didn't go anywhere. And so I got to go on ABC, and that was really cool. And there was a really nice review in Forbes, which was really neat. But the review in Forbes I got, that didn't come from them. And the ABC one was sort of the only mainstream news piece that happened. So it is interesting to think of the publisher as an accelerant in a sense, where if you can get it to a certain level, and if you can get a big anchor piece of media, they can like 10x it from there because they have all those connections. It's way easier for them to say, hey, this is getting covered in this, so you need to cover it too, than it is for them to say like, hey, here's this author you probably haven't heard of with this story you haven't heard of, like you should cover it because they have thousands of those coming their way. So I think that was one of the big surprises, was just how much stuff could like not come through at the end that I thought was maybe going to happen.
For sure. We have like a very similar like corollary in podcasting with, if you've been on Rogan or you've been on Chris, or you get like something that gives a nod of confidence, then you know the one tier below like eat you up and want to create that kind of sound effect, surround sound effect around you. I feel like the New York Times is super involved in all of like the book publishing industry. Not only if you get like a nice review and a sweet article and you have that established nature, but then also in the rankings. How do the rankings on New York Times differ from Amazon, for example?
So the New York Times, most people don't know this, but the New York Times bestseller list is not actually a bestseller list. It is the best-selling books that the New York Times thinks you should read. And so they curate that list. And if they think a book doesn't, meet whatever their criteria is for a good book, or has ideas that they disagree with, they won't put it on the list, even if it's selling enough copies to make the list. And Rob Henderson, the author of Troubled, he came up with the idea of luxury beliefs, really popular internet writer. His book came out and it sold more than enough copies to make it into something like the middle of the New York Times list for the first couple of weeks that it was out. And they never featured it, most likely because it was very critical of the like liberal elite coastal kind of establishment that New York Times kind of caters to. And so it was interesting to see this happen in real time and then to hear him talk about it, about how some bestseller lists featured his book and others didn't, and the pretty clear ideological divide between the places that did and did not. And unfortunately, most people don't realize that the New York Times bestseller list works this way, right? They just see, oh, it's the bestseller list, these must be the best-selling books. And it's like, no, these are the best-selling books that the New York Times thinks you should read, or that meet their criteria. Ryan Holiday is another example of this, and he's talked about this where he got blacklisted from the New York Times list for a number of years because of the prank he pulled on them for Trust Me, I'm Lying. And that's obviously a little bit different, where it wasn't like an ideological thing, it was like a relationship thing, personal. But it's useful to know that that's how it works, right? And so this is why James Clear always says that if you actually want to know how popular a book is, you should just look at the Amazon rankings, because that's where well over half of all books are sold today. How something is ranking on Amazon is the number one source of truth for how popular that book is. Now, granted, there's a recency bias there because the rankings are updated every 8 hours, and it's mostly based on how many books you've sold in the last few days. So you will have books that have sold very well over a year, but are usually not ranked very highly on Amazon because they might have these spikes. So you have to do some, reconciliation and whatnot if you want to find out the best books over a year, but it is a much better source of truth in general.
That's really similar to how the iTunes and Spotify algorithms work as well.
It's like net new subscribers or net new listeners.
It's basically ratio of new to old listeners over the last calendar week.
Okay.
And so if you can ratio it really, really high, you can jump up really fast in the charts, but it doesn't actually mean how many people are listening at all. It's more about that ratio.
Got it.
Because you can have somebody who has 14 million downloads be below or near somebody who's 5,000.
Interesting.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I find that side of all these businesses very interesting. How do you game the rankings, game the charts? And that was one thing that was frustrating going through a traditional publisher, was the total lack of visibility I had into how the book was selling, when it was selling, where it was selling. You really don't get almost any information on that. You get a report a week later of how many copies you sold the previous week, broken down by format. But it doesn't even tell you if you sold more of those on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or which bookstores are selling. It's very abstracted, and it makes it basically impossible to do a lot of marketing things that you would otherwise do. One, because you're losing a lot of the data on how things are selling. And two, because, this is another thing that I hadn't thought about until I had the book deal. You are not incentivized financially to push a lot of sales to your book until it's earned out.
Yeah.
Because you've already been paid for the first, I have to sell something like 60 or 70,000 copies of Crypto Confidential before I get another check.
Yeah.
And so until that number is hit, if I spend any money on marketing, I make zero back from that.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue like, well, you already got paid for it right now. But like, okay, if the publisher's not spending money on marketing, I'm not going to spend money on marketing.
Sure.
You end up in this really weird incentive structure that ultimately I just didn't like. It's like it didn't make me feel like I was as in control of my destiny and my work as I wanted, especially having been kind of a internet entrepreneur for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. It just made it very hard to justify going back.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like one of those things that's like get accepted into Harvard, but, drop out.
Yeah.
Like, because you just need the credibility.
Oh, yeah.
At some level. Like, the old media and the old systems, they still do have like a legitimizing effect, especially with older people.
Yes.
Which is still the majority of the population, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, and there is this truth to when you say you have self-published a book, the immediate reaction from someone is, oh, you couldn't get a publisher, mm-hmm. right? And it's going to take a long time for that to change, if it ever changes, because it is still that like badge of honor, badge of legitimacy. Mm-hmm. And I like that I can say, well, I did my first book with Penguin Random House, and I honestly didn't like the experience very much. And so I decided to, and the way I say it is I hired a publishing company mm-hmm. to produce this book, mm-hmm. because that's really what I did with Scribe. I mean, Scribe is an independent publishing company where you retain the rights, and I hired them to help me produce it so that I could keep all of the upside, mm-hmm. But with a much worse risk profile going into it. If 0 copies of Crypto Confidential sold, I would have still gotten $250,000. Yeah. If 0 copies of Husk sell, I'm in the hole like $30,000. That's a lot worse.
Yeah.
So, but it feels better. It's mm-hmm. I like having that degree of control.
Definitely. And, you can keep like building the universe. And as the universe expands, it's just like it becomes like a network effect.
Almost. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the really interesting thing about talking about marketing fiction versus nonfiction. And we were talking about this a bit before we started recording, right? Like, what do we talk about from the book? Because we don't want to talk about plot points, because if somebody wants to go read it, we don't want to spoil anything. Mm-hmm. And so you lose some ability to like market the book, because ultimately what you're marketing is, hey, this is a really fun read. You're going to enjoy reading it. It's entertainment. Like, go get it. There isn't a blog post sized version of the ideas or the stories that you can talk about on a podcast the way you can with like a nonfiction book.
For sure.
And so a lot of fiction, it's really interesting talking to experts in the like fiction marketing world versus the nonfiction marketing, because nonfiction marketing is a lot about the build up to the release. It's building the email list. It's getting the podcasts. It's using the credibility that got you the book deal to market the book and market your ideas and give people teasers of those ideas so that they go buy the full thing. Mm-hmm. But in fiction, it's a lot more like, no, you get the book out. You finish it, you get it in people's hands, people like it, and then they talk about it. Mm-hmm. And you try to accelerate how many people talk about it, and you try to like amplify people talking about it, how much they like it. But most of it starts once people can actually read the book. Yeah. And so that was a big adjustment for me, where it, certain people who I already knew and had a relationship with, like yourself, I could reach out to and say, hey, do you want to read this? Maybe talk about it for the podcast. But for like book review accounts or BookTube, Book Talk, like all of those, I can't really do anything until the book is out. Because even for an ARC, even for an advanced copy, they're getting those like every week, right? They're getting hundreds of pitches a week from people, especially self-published people who have written a book and want them to read it. And you'll be completely lost in that noise. But if I come to them in a few weeks or a couple months, and the book has a couple hundred reviews on Amazon, is well liked, it's a much easier pitch. Mm-hmm. And then to your point, you publish a second, third, fourth, fifth book in the universe. The people who make it through to like books 2, 3, 4, they start talking about it more. People who heard about Husk maybe didn't pick it up. They hear about the second book, they hear about the third book, and then they suddenly go back and pick up the first one. And now you have a customer for like 4 products instead of 1 product. Yeah. So it's this very different marketing game But again, one that I like a lot better because you're building this compounding thing over time that can turn to something really crazy once it gets going.
For sure. It feels like Paul almost like approached his nonfiction book launch with a fiction model. Like,
Yeah.
because like the long, slow, dumb fun, and that feels like it'll be way better for fiction.
Yeah.
Like I know with Dune, it wasn't until Children of Dune that it really got picked up very seriously. So his third book, and that was one where people decided, because the cult following of Dune picked up over the next decade. When Children of Dune came out, it actually was the first hardcover science fiction book ever published.
Oh, I didn't
which
know
it
that.
brought the whole space up a huge level. But that was
Yeah.
like 3 books later, and then now Dune has become this like mega fucking movement across the world. Like 40 years later.
Oh yeah.
It's so sick.
Well, and if you think about when you pick up, a fiction book, it's almost never the first book in the series, and it's almost never the first novel by an author. Like Harry Potter, right? Most people in the U.S. didn't find out about it until book 3. That was the first time it became big in the U.S. Or like Red Rising.
Yep.
Most people got into Red Rising in the last 2 or 3 years when it was already on book 5 or 6.
Yep.
The Will of the Many is maybe the one counterexample that a lot of us have gotten into.
Yeah, but
in
James,
the first
James
year.
Islington, that's like he's written a fuck ton of other books.
Yeah, it's
I'm now
his-
almost done with like one of his earlier ones, and it's amazing as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He had a whole trilogy before this
Yep.
that was
Yeah.
much less popular.
Yeah.
And so it's a very common story in fiction that, you have to get a bunch of books out before you get that word of mouth critical mass going, that they all rise up. Dungeon Crawler Carl. Have you read this series?
I haven't. I've gotten a lot of recs of it. I haven't
Oh
read
my
it
God.
though.
It's so fun. I read
Yeah.
all 7 in a month.
Hell yeah.
Because it's just wildly entertaining. But it didn't get really popular until the last year when the 7th book came out. So, it's kind of like this slow build thing, and you got to have the patience for it.
Dude, this reminds me, in The Way of Kings, it's each of their books is so long.
Yeah.
Like the smallest one is 1,200 pages, I think.
Yeah.
And it took me until the 5th book for me to be like, this is great.
Yeah.
Like it was really good the whole time, but the 5th book I was like totally amazing, like so worth reading. And it made me just realize how important friction is in society today, because anybody who I know that has made it to that 5th book, we can live in this universe and discuss crazy shit together. Shout out Chris Ho, and it's just super exciting and fun, and we can speak this language because we've built this trust up together. But if the majority of people are like, spending an hour a day just like doom scrolling, 70 different TikTok videos, they don't remember like any of them.
Yeah.
And it's like this, so much of the world is pushing towards frictionlessness, and that's just decreasing the value of anything. And really, it's like all on the other side of friction, especially around good ideas and big ideas and important ideas.
Yeah.
Which feels counterintuitive from like a marketing or growth perspective. But it just seems like if we can popularize ice baths, with all it is just starting your day with friction or increasing your friction, maybe there's some health benefits. You definitely get like a huge dopamine rush for sure. So that's a positive. But it's like, how can we get people to get like ice baths around ideas or about reading?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, thankfully, reading hasn't been dying the way I think some people were worried it was going to. It feels like the world is becoming very bimodal in the sense of we're either scrolling TikToks or listening to 3-hour podcast interviews, right? And you would think that in this hyperactive, short attention span world, there would be no place for 3-hour interviews, but like there is. They're only getting more popular. What's died is like the middle, the 20-minute interview. Like people almost just don't even want that anymore.
The heavily edited NPR, like...
Exactly. Yep. They want the 1-minute clip or the full 3-hour thing.
Yeah.
Right. And the clips have almost become lead gen, right? Like TBPN does a really good job of this, where they have all their clips on X throughout the day.
Yeah.
But I'll listen to a lot of the TBPN 3-hour podcast because I know it's going to be pretty good, interesting material.
For sure.
And so it's interesting to see, some of these series do really well, right? Like the Cosmere, where 5 books, 1,200 pages each. That's a massive commitment.
Yeah.
The Crawler books, it's 7 books, about 600 pages each. Like that's a big commitment. Like a lot of these actually do really well, and there's very little historic precedent for books of this scale, because if you think about like the canonical epic fantasy, it's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
But the entire Lord of the Rings is shorter than one Way of Kings book.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really short,
Yeah.
Like if when you split it out into the 3 books, they're like 300 pages each. Like Husk is longer than the Fellowship of the Ring, which is kind of ridiculous, right? So people's attention spans are both getting shorter and longer in this like weird splitting that makes me bullish on books and actually short on blogging.
And this is where I differentiate. It makes me really bullish on like fiction books
Yeah.
versus nonfiction. Like I think that we've already peaked past this kind of like personal development, James Clear, not that he's going to stop selling books, but like Tim Ferriss, like that whole world. I feel like that's almost like now past because you can get most of that in a 3-hour podcast.
Yeah.
But, you know, if we're talking about like One Piece, like the amount of people who in the last 1.5 or 2 years have sat down and watched 1,000 episodes of One Piece and are so hyped on it, like it's massive, and it's just that's becoming more and more popular.
Totally. And I think for a lot of ideas, fiction is a much better vehicle because you know, after I finished Crypto Confidential and I was thinking about the next book I wanted to write, I started a draft of a book based on an article I wrote called Leaving the Church of Science. And the premise was basically how science and technology have basically become a religion that a lot of people have like chosen to put their faith in, and that has had good consequences for society, but also a lot of bad ones. And so it was basically making the argument that treating science like a faith is not necessarily a good thing. It's something we should be careful about. Or like pretty in vogue idea, nothing revolutionary. But in the process of outlining it, I was like, well, I think it would be a good book, and I think it would have readership, but it might be like a John Gray book, right? And I love John Gray. He's one of my favorite like living philosophers. And you know, Straw Dogs is wonderful. New Leviathans is great. The Cat book, they're all really, really good. They're not popular. Like not many people read them. He's not much of a household name outside of like nerdy people who, you know, like to read philosophy for fun. And so I started asking myself like, okay, could I take some of these ideas and put them into a package that is a lot more fun and a lot more widely accessible? And that was one of the forces that ended up driving me towards doing fiction writing and like writing sci-fi, because I mean, Husk is paced like a thriller. Yeah. It's very fast. Yeah. You can really like clip through it. And I've put those ideas in there, but not so much that it like slows down the reading. And if somebody just wants the action in the world, they can kind of like skip through some of those pieces. And the people who like it, like they love those parts of the book. It's off. Some of the people who read it, it's like that's their favorite part, right? And so that to me is really satisfying, because it's like, okay, here is this more widely distributable package that can still share these ideas, but in a way where they have a chance of breaking out of the like nerdy class that just wants to read them raw.
Dude, I think I'm like, that was one of the most impressive things, especially for your first fiction book.
Thank you.
Was the pacing.
Thank you.
Because it really, like a lot of science fiction, a lot of the great science fiction, like it takes 200 pages to like get sucked into it. Like, yeah. I think when you recommended Dark Matter to me, that's one of the things you said. It's like, boom, you immediately get into it. And I felt that with this. I started on a flight back to California. It was like 3 hours. And I was like zoned in immediately and didn't want the plane to arrive. I was like, fuck, can we get another hour? Yeah. Especially because Athena was sleeping, so I knew I wasn't going to get like another straight hour of reading. It was like, come on, let's just circle.
The stopwatch
let's
is
circle
on.
the tarmac for a while. So I just like keep going deeper. And I was like, damn, that's awesome. Like you did such a great job.
Thank you.
For that to be the experience of reading it.
Yeah.
I also like it because a lot of it takes place in and around Austin, which is increasing the Austin canon, because, you know, you had The Last of Us, both the game and the movie, it's like takes place in Austin. You had, or it's some version of Austin. You had, you know, the New White Lotus, like one of the ladies is from Austin, and there is this like kind of cultural Austin canon being created and increased. So that brought me some joy as well.
Yeah, that was kind of a fun thing for me too, because it, you know, it's a very like technology based book. Basically everyone has died out 100 years ago from this plague, and most of the people who have lived are living to maintain the rest of humanity who transferred their consciousness into machines and are living in this like server world. And originally I was like, oh, you know, this should be based in California or something, because obviously this big tech advancement of consciousness transfer is going to happen in California. And then I kind of said like, well, it could happen here too. It's like a lot of people are moving here. There's a lot of good tech here. And if we're thinking 10 years in the future, when like the fall happens in the backstory of the book, like even in 10 years, will there be more tech in Austin or less? Like definitely more. And there's a bunch of other parts of the world that come in book 2 and book 3 that also make a lot of sense in the like broader Texas lore. All of these like defense tech companies that got repurposed into like Armageddon companies essentially. And like a lot of that would make sense to be in Texas. And so it's kind of a fun setting, because it hasn't been used that much in sci-fi. And you'll actually, this is a, okay, this isn't too much of a spoiler. Book 2 has like a Comanche related subplot.
Oh, sick.
And so that's also Texas lore, right? It's like you can bring in a lot of like cool things from our local history and the current trajectory the area is on that, I don't know, I think it's really fun.
And is book 2 like the predecessor novella, or is book 2 like Husk 2 the second in the future?
Yes. So book 2 is about a month after the events of Husk.
Oh, sick. Okay, cool.
And so it's continuing, Isaac's storyline, everyone else's. But then there's a novella that should come out later this year. I'm finishing it up now. That is just on the day transference gets solved.
Oh, sick.
So, one of the major characters in Husk is Felix, who was the scientist, technologist, business person who created the company that created the transference technology. And so he's basically the leader of the digital paradise, Meru, in Husk, and one of the main characters that the physical world people is interacting with. And so the novella, which is called The Birth of Paradise, is just the 4 hours where he solves it. He invites someone to his house to interview him to talk about this momentous day for humanity where we're going to end death, and the backstory and his relationship with his wife, and what drove him to try to solve mortality. Which I love the novella. It's real. I'm really excited to get that one out too.
Fuck yeah.
Because it's slower. It's less of a thriller pace, but it's a lot more emotional because it's dealing with these questions of okay, you're the richest, most powerful person in the world. What would you do to save the person you love? And it's quite a lot. And what would it do to you if you failed?
Yeah.
Again, being one of these most powerful people in the world.
Yeah.
And so dealing with all of the emotions around that created a really rich experience in a pretty small package. So that I'm excited to get that out too, because I know that picking up a new series is a big ask, right? A series is exciting because there's going to be more to this world, right? There's going to be subsequent books that you can also enjoy if you enjoy the first one, but it can also be intimidating because it's oh, well, I don't know if I want to commit to 5 books. Yeah. Or this is why I haven't read Way of Kings, because I don't know if I want to commit to reading all 5. It's there's a lot of books to read. Yeah. But the novella is, you can read them in either order. You could read Husk first or The Birth of Paradise first. And so it almost provides this entry point to the world in 120 pages instead of 400. And if somebody really likes the novella, then they're going to want to pick up Husk. If somebody really likes Husk, they're going to want to read the novella too. So it's this cool way to market the series that I've seen other self-pub, especially authors, do a very good job of.
Yeah, I invested in a bookstore in Indianapolis, and one of the commentaries that the woman who runs it, Julia, had on Instagram the other day, and I've heard it from a lot of really deep fantasy fans, is they won't start a series that isn't finished.
Yeah.
So it's you have both sides, right? The super deep people who are willing to half their identity is reading, and they're willing to spend that time in trying to capture them, so make sure you're getting it out fast, moving forward, but also getting that entry point in and making it available as fast as possible and accessible as possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of people got burned by Name of the Wind.
Oh, dude, I'm so burned by it. I got wind scars for sure.
Yeah, and it's he only fell off after book 2, right? And Game of Thrones, obviously, Winds of Winter's probably not coming out. He's probably going to have to do what Robert Jordan did and have somebody finish it after his death. Yeah. And somebody said this that I thought was it sounds bad, but there's also some truth in it, which was that Jordan got a little bit of the easy way out by not having to finish it, because it does seem to really handicap these authors who build these massive worlds, where I don't know if it's the pressure from the fans or just not being entirely sure how you want to I'd be curious to hear from them what makes it so hard to tie it off at the end, where there might actually be something helpful about having somebody else who really loves the world come in and tie it off for you. Because if you're Martin, you've been working on Game of Thrones for 30 years?
Yeah. It's
most of his life.
Yeah.
That's got to be really hard to tie up in a way that you're happy with.
Dude, I bet. Yeah, and his whole life is these characteristics. So if he kills it before they die, what does he do?
That too.
That's one thing Oda right now, Ishiro Oda, who wrote One Piece and has been writing One Piece, has been working on it for 25 years, and he's thinking it's going to wrap up like relatively soon, like the next like 3 to 5 years. He actually said next year, but that seems impossible. But like for some reason, I have so much faith in his ability to do it more than any other characters. My friends and I are like arguing about this weekend because one of them has like no faith, but he has just delivered over and over and over again. And he has got that like Japanese motherfucking work ethic too. Like he literally works 6 days a week, like 8 to 10 hours a day. The other day, his wife and daughter live in a separate house, and then he goes home 1 day a week, veggies out with the fucking fam, and then he just goes back to building this world.
Oh my God.
And it just has like continuously delivered and gotten bigger and more like insane and imaginative and epic over and over and over again. And now it's hit since it went on Netflix for the live action. It was the first ever like good review live action that's ever happened.
Yeah.
It's now hit this new cultural thing where it's taken over the Sphere multiple times, partnering with the Lakers. Like,
That's cool.
all of this like shit is starting to happen, and it's all just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I do think he's going to land the ship, but I think it's only because he's not, like an old English man drinking scotch, late at night being like, fuck, like my whole identity is caught up in this. He's just like the Kaizen Japanese dude, just like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, and there is something to that where it's like I really feel that editing only makes things better to a certain point. And you can really over edit something where you're just making it worse or going in circles. And it's hard to figure out how to like sell the top of that curve, right? Because the first draft isn't going to be shippable most likely, but it's going to set the range for how good this product can eventually become. And then, the second draft and the third draft, you're going to make it incrementally better, but there's going to be diminishing returns on it. And then it feels like once you get to maybe the like fourth or the fifth, you start to hit this point where it's like, okay, it's plateaued and you're just spinning your wheels because you're afraid to put it out in the public, or you're actually like making it worse because now you've read it too many times where you can't see it like a newcomer anymore. And so you've like lost a bit of that perspective that allows you to like fully enjoy it. And like that's like a tough place to get into. And so there's this interesting like rationing you have to do, I think, of how many times you look at your work, because each time you look at it, you're going to see ways to improve it, but you're also going to see ways that it's bad. And if you let the ways that you see it's bad get into your head too much, you're just never going to release it into the world. And I mean, ultimately the only way you get good is by being able to see the bad so you can go improve it. But that becomes a curse too, because you're just so fixated on what's not good that you lose sight of what is good. And then you can get stuck spinning your wheels for years and years and years. I think you'll see this with authors a lot, right? Where they're just like editing, and their book takes 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And sometimes that works really well, but a lot of times it was probably good to go a couple of years earlier, and they should have just moved on to the next book.
Yeah, and your fan base didn't just fucking hate you forever.
Yeah,
I feel
that
like
too.
musicians are probably a really good case study to look at for that. Because they spend a lot of time picking the right songs. It doesn't take that long to record a song.
Yeah.
Most like the most famous musicians in the world, like, yeah, dude, we made it like 4 a.m. after like 30 seconds. Like, but you have to pick the album when you're doing the album and then mastering it, and it does but they do ship really fast, even though they will sit with the songs for a while.
Yeah, and there is also this element of just like, one, luck, and two, like consistency and volume. It's easy to get in your head that, oh, all of these authors' first books were mega successes. And it's like, well, that's just because that's the book they could get a deal for. They probably wrote 3, 5, 10 books before that they either didn't ship or didn't get a deal for, and then that was the one where they did. And they didn't like just do the first book and keep editing that first one and editing until they got a deal for it. I mean, some of them did, but that's a much less common story than what you hear like Sanderson talk about, where, the first book he got a deal for was his 7th book and Mistborn was his 14th, right? Or, Pierce Brown, Red Rising was his 7th book, And so it wasn't like his first book was a mega success. It's like, no, he threw away 6 books until he got Red Rising. Yeah. And the nice thing about self-publishing is that you're not constrained by only being able to publish what you'll get a good deal for. Because sometimes publishers get it right, but they also get it wrong. And just because a publisher says no to a book doesn't mean it can't be successful. And so it is very freeing in that sense of like, no, you can take more of a like Asimov or James Patterson or Stephen King approach of like, just be fucking prolific and get a lot of books out, and you're going to have some of them do extremely well and some of them not do so well. And that's just kind of the name of the game.
Yeah. I mean, it's such like so connected to artists like throughout all of art history. Like, you know, we know like Picasso's blue period or like the red period. Those are like 7 of the paintings he painted in that time period out of like 1,000. Literal 1,000 like paintings. And those are the ones that the critics kind of globbed onto and people became obsessed with. But they painted, you know, tens of thousands of paintings over their lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen King has published 80-something books, I think. And most people can name 3 or 4, right? And that's not a criticism of King. It's like, that's what you've got to be willing to do. Patterson's published 200 books, right? And most people probably can name a couple of like Alex Cross books. But like that series works incredibly well for him. And he's done 30 or 40 of like just the Alex Cross universe, right? And some of them do really well and some of them don't, like Michael Crichton. Most people know Jurassic Park, right? And they might know like Andromeda Strain or and like maybe Timeline, but there's a lot of other books in there too. Like a lot of these people, there's a huge backlog of stuff that you hadn't heard of that had to be created to make the stuff that you have heard of.
Yeah.
I mean, Asimov, 400 books.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
for sure.
And most people can name Foundation and iRobot, right?
Yeah.
But like, that's all you need.
Yeah. How do you actually, so that's like intellectually, I agree with you. Me as a fan or friend, I can tell you that. How do you, sitting here about to publish your first fiction book, knowing that you have another one on the way and another one on the way, and let's say we get 2 years down the line, all 3 of these are published, and you're like, fuck, you know what, am I going to keep going? Do I got a 4th in me? Knowing that it might take till the 7th. Like, what is your inner voice saying around this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I know that I'm not a 7-book series person. Okay. I think it's just a personality. Like, I really love one-offs or short series. You know, I love Crichton. I love like Blake Crouch. You know, I love, if I really like a series, it's 3 Body Problem, right? Which is 3 books. And the first 2 are not actually very long. Like book 1 is only 100,000 words and book 2 is like 120. Book 3 is longer, but I mean, book 3 even is like 180,000 words.
Yeah.
And that's how long like one Leviathan Wakes book is. And, Leviathan Wakes, 8 books, 8 novellas, massive series. I just like, that's not the like size that I necessarily want to do in one world. Now, that said, if I get all 3 Husks out and the novella or 2 that I'm thinking, and there are like a ton of raving fans who want another trilogy, like maybe I could be talked into it. But to me, I have all of these ideas for like smaller worlds and smaller ideas to explore that I like the huge number of one-offs or, trilogies or things like that a lot better. And I think part of that's just like knowing yourself too. Like, I'm not a slow world building fantasy writer, right? Like I just read Empire of Silence. Okay. You heard of this book? It's having a moment right now. So the Empire of Silence is the first book in a series called the Sun Eater series. And there are 6 books out. 7th one is on the way. They're long. They're like 600-page books. And I'll be honest, like the first book is good. It's not amazing. And it kind of like meandered for a while in the beginning. And it tied it off in a satisfying way where I was glad that I finished it. But there was a lot in the early and middle where I was like, I don't know if I want to finish this. I'm not sure where this is going. But apparently book 2 is fantastic and book 3 is incredible. And so like we were saying, he had all these raving fans that it didn't get popular until like book 5 was out, right? And so some people do have that patience and are that committed to like one world. But for me, it's like I love the Meru world. Like I love this universe. And there are so many other like worlds and things that I want to do that I know I won't just like stay in this one forever. I have another one that I like really want to do. And it's been this big struggle for me right now of like, do I try to write this book before Husk 2 or do I do the like responsible thing and finish Husk 1, 2, 3 before doing something tangential? And like, I actually don't know what the answer is because on the one hand, like, yeah, I should finish the series to some extent as quickly as possible because then you get more of the flywheel going. And like you said, some people don't want to pick it up until the series is done. But on the other hand, I'm a fast writer. I can produce a lot quicker than most people can in this space. And so I could still get Husk 2 out like within a year and a half of Husk 1 while also publishing this other book in between the 2 of them. And that's still a really good pace. But, it's like, well, would it be better if Husk 2 came out after 9 months and then Husk 3 was another 9 months? Like, that would be really good. Like, I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I'm still just trying to figure out is like, how do I balance the discipline of staying focused and doing the like quote unquote smart economic thing versus giving in somewhat to the like passion side of this other story is really exciting. And when I tell people the premise, they get really excited about it. And so it really feels like there's something there too.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I don't know exactly.
Yeah, dude. I mean, that sounds like a challenge. I just know, just based on how fast you can put stuff out, I think you'll figure it out. Like, whatever you decide is probably the right move.
I think it's going to work. Yeah.
It'll work, but I mean, that would be really hard for me. It's pretty shocking to watch you work on projects. Like, it feels like, I thought, maybe last year that you work really fast or like do a lot of stuff and have a lot going on. And then to think about this year where it was like, oh, I wrote a book, then I self-published it, then I wrote another mini book, the novella. Now I'm working on the second one. And like, I'm also having a kid, and I side quested this like AI coding course that made like $300,000. And then it's like, I'm just always blown away by your ability to execute. So like, what does like a day look like for you?
Thanks, man. It varies a lot. Like when I'm in drafting mode, I try to make that the only expectation I have on myself. And so when I started on Crypto Confidential, I set my daily expectation at like 1,200 to 1,500 words a day while I was in draft mode. And then by the time I got to the first time I tried to write Husk, I was doing about 2,000 words a day. And then I threw that out and started over. And then I was actually, I did the first draft of this Husk in about a month and was doing like 5,000 words a day. And that was crazy. That was too much. But it increased what I was able to do. And so for the novella and for the work I've done on Husk 2, I've gotten my daily expectation up to like 2,500 to 3,000 words a day. And I can just kind of like sit down and do that now, partially because I am good at like saying no to other things. Mm-hmm. So, doing 3,000 words a day when you have another job and, tons of emails and meetings and things like that is like basically impossible.
Yeah.
But I can just go sit in the coffee shop or my office and write for 6 hours a day, completely undistracted. And then it becomes pretty manageable. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what's worked really well for me is just like being hyper focused on one thing at a time for these sprints, and then taking breaks, but on the breaks doing other things. So it's like I finished the final version of Husk and was going to start on the novella, but then did this like AI course while I started getting the production done for Husk. And then I finished the first 2 drafts of the novella just in time to like gear up for marketing for Husk.
Yeah.
And after I finished the first draft of the novella, I was letting it sit for a month before I looked at it so it could, simmer. And then during that month, I started Husk 2 and got like 45,000 words into that. And so by just like using breaks to thread the projects together and not trying to do all of them at the same time, I end up moving a lot faster, I think, than if I were trying to do like, okay, 1 hour on marketing and then 2 hours on writing and then 2 hours on editing. It's like very focused for very intense short periods, brief breaks onto the next thing while the previous thing sits, and then come back to it. Yeah. And that's worked very well for a like writing schedule.
I think that's where I'm getting like really caught up is it's like, okay, this business, this hour of the day, podcast this hour of the day, this other business, this part of the day, trying to like, and then managing all of that. That's where I'm getting definitely very lost and need to figure out how to like split it up a lot more.
Dude, and it's hard. I mean,
do you have any employees right now?
No. And I think that's something I've really committed to, where after Crypto Confidential and after being crypto for that period, I had a little bag from that that I could use to fund going after the writing. And that was the plan was it's like, okay, I'm just going to focus on writing until it takes off. And I'm going to use this crypto money to like fund going in that direction. And, that's hard because it's a significant change in income, right? And a significant change in timeline. And this like AI course opportunity fell into my lap early this year. And like you said, it did extremely well. And then I didn't work on any book stuff for 2 months. Yeah. And it was kind of like another reminder of like, I can't do these other things. It's like the minute I start working on something like that to, chase money in the short term, it works, which is like, it's almost like its own type of punishment.
For sure.
It's like, I'm good at these things.
It's a different type of golden handcuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I'm good at that stuff. Like I know how to do the, internet influencer, course boy, whatever productivity business. And it can be a very profitable business, but I don't want to do it. It's not going to be satisfying for me. And I don't think that on a 5 to 10 to 20 year timeline, it's a good investment in my time because it can make money very fast, but then it falls off a cliff and then you're like chasing the next win, right? Whereas this career where you're like publishing fiction, very slow start, like brutally slow start, but you really stick with it and you do a good job of it. And then after 5 or 10 or 20 years, it compounds into something really powerful. And so I just kind of have to like keep pulling myself out of the internet mind, short-term win focus, whatever that I always feel drawn to and try to like say no to it and just focus on like, no, do this. Because if I lose 2 months a year doing other things over 10 years, that becomes like 2 of those years, right? I mean, it's a huge loss and that's going to make the thing that I want to succeed take longer to succeed. And I just kind of have to like keep reminding myself of that, but it's fucking hard.
Yeah. It's a great
It's
reminder,
really hard.
but it is definitely, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
One of the mini side quests that was kind of made sense though, was you were selling, this is like a few years ago, you probably still are, but you were basically selling your reviews or your notes. The notes, that's the key. You're selling your book notes from, all these top books. You've also, if you, search your name on YouTube, it's like all of your reviews pop up.
Yeah.
Like, so you've gotten pretty prolific at reviews. What makes a good book?
So, I mean, most of that was when I was deep in the nonfiction world, where I feel like I read every popular, like self-help, nonfiction, self-improvement, whatever book out there, and was early on sharing my notes on my site. Derek Sivers really pioneered this and he started it. And then I basically copied what he was doing and started sharing my notes. And I think I have the second most on my site of basically anybody who's done this. Derek has the most, and then mine's the second most popular, I believe. And in the beginning, it was just a way to keep myself accountable of like distilling the information I got from books. And then it turned into a good way to get traffic to my site because, I mean, to this day, you Google a lot of these books, you Google like 48 Laws of Power. And I'm usually on the front page of Google for that, or like almost any other book. You'll end up at my site if it's in that category. And I did the same thing on Instagram. It was a really great way to grow my Instagram. But in terms of what I learned from that for what makes a good book in the like nonfiction space, I mean, I'd say there's 2 parts of it. One is the like objective part of it, where it's okay, can this writer make a good argument and say something true in an interesting way? And those are tough things to do because one, people like just might not be very interesting, or 2, they might be trying to like push an agenda versus saying something that's like true, so to speak. But really, I think what I learned from it was that the best of those kinds of books were the ones from people who had some particular life experience that they were sharing their lessons from versus the people who were like looking at the world and trying to explain it. So you think about like Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. Not necessarily good life advice, but one of the like most incredible self-help books there is because I mean, he just has such an incredible story and he like really walks the walk. He lives that life. Or for a slightly different, but I think equally good example, like Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Incredible book on investing and psychology around money that's shaped by his years as an investor, both in like more traditional investing, but also in, early stage, more like startup-y investing. And so he was bringing so much experience and insight to that, combined with his ability to tell these really great short stories that like convey the ideas. And I think Tim Ferriss's original trilogy was so incredible for this reason too, where he wanted to solve making money. He wanted to solve getting in shape. He wanted to solve learning. And he went out and he studied and he figured out what worked. And then he came back and he told everybody else how to do those things. And then I think Ferris is a really good example here, because to me, Tools of Titans was like not a good book.
Yeah.
Because it was just
it was a really easy book. It was a very layupy that will sell from this podcast, from this thing. Yeah,
exactly. But there was no distillation. There was none of his experience and his trying and monkeying, and like there was no him in it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was just like a researcher took all his notes.
I think so.
Yeah.
And
Probably Aristo. Shout out Aristo. Let's go.
And I think Tribe of Mentors was almost like worse, because it was basically just like other people's answers to these questions.
Yeah.
And so those were like, to me as a longtime Tim fan, they were actually really disappointing, because I was like, oh, the thing that I loved you for in the beginning, you're not doing anymore. Right. And so that was kind of a disappointment. And you see that a lot with like nonfiction, with, like thread boys who are summarizing a Wikipedia page about a topic, or like Naval Ravikant grew up poor in India, and like here are the 7 things, whatever, and like you don't need any of that, because you can read the Almanac of Naval by Eric and Naval, where it's like actually Naval talking about Naval, right? And that to me is almost like some of the only nonfiction worth reading in that category, is like, here is this person with this life experience, and they're going to share what they learned from it, and that is way more useful than like, I studied a bunch of experts, or I looked at billionaires' habits, or I read all these papers and like, here is the takeaway. Like that stuff to me is just never very useful or like true, so to speak. Even when I'm thinking about the 4-Hour Chef, which is his book on learning, masquerading as a cookbook, I can't remember. I think it's like DIS is the framework he uses for learning. I think a part of that was like destroy or like get rid of it. Now when I watch Athena, like so much of her understanding reality is just going through and breaking things apart. Deconstruction. Like deconstruction, exactly. And it's just like, now like that overlay there is so crazy to me, because every time she does this all day, and I'm just like, holy shit, she's trying to understand the world. And that's like Tim was able to distill down to, was deconstruction is like the first part of like starting the learning journey. I mean, 4-Hour Chef was my favorite of his books.
So good.
It's so good. It's so underappreciated. And I almost like, when he talks about it, you can feel there's like a bit of pain, I think, around that book.
I think it went so poorly. Because he was the first ever Amazon published book. Everybody just like book. Fucking raped him on like the mainstream media shit. Got banned from all the bookstores. And by packaging it as a like cooking book, if he had done like the 4-Hour Genius or something, right? You could have had the exact same content, and like that packaging might have appealed to a lot more people, because you have to say like, no, it's not actually a cookbook, right? It's not actually about cooking, it's about like learning, and it's so good at those topics, and so I wish for him that had gone better, because I do wonder if that like soured him on that branding, or like what impact that had on him with the stuff he created after it's so funny too, because even when I did get that book, because I was a fan before from the other books, but it was when I was just graduating from college and living on my own for the first time and having to cook. And actually, I think for like the first 6 months, I skipped the whole first part. I went straight to cooking. Then I went back when I was trying to teach myself how to code, and I went through and saw this, and I was like, wait, this is gold.
This is incredible.
And it's like it's not even that long. It's like 50 to 70 pages, but like, this is so fucking great.
Oh, and that's another like shame of the publishing industry, because those first 50 to 70 pages are just gold. Like, you really don't need any other how to learn book that's been published besides the 50 to 70 pages in 4-Hour Chef. But he never could have published just those 50 to 70 pages, because no publisher wants to publish a book that's that length. And this is another area where I think self-publishing is really cool, is it's like, you can do that, right? Like, nobody publishes novellas. Like, if you write a novella, unless it's like a really literary thing and you're getting picked up by an indie publisher, or if you're, James S.A. Corey and you've got Leviathan Wakes and you're adding auxiliary novellas, like, then you'll get away with it. For the most part, publishers just won't publish anything under 60 to 70,000 words because of the like unit economics of doing it. But I mean, if I want to publish a 120 page book, I can, because I control it. Like, and that's sick, because it's perfect at 110, 120 pages. Like, it is tight. It gets the message across. The pacing is great. If I tried to pad that to 200 pages, it wouldn't be a good book anymore, and it couldn't be a short story either. There's like too much for short stories. So it was like great at that length. And I think people love that length of book. Like, Martha Wells has actually really disrupted the publishing industry in this sense in the last few years with the Murderbot Diaries. Have you read those? Oh, they're so good. They're really fun. They're really fast, and they're short. They're like 180 pages. but like small print. I think they're like 50,000 words. And she just published one every like 6 or 9 months, like pretty back to back to back. And they published them in hardcover, small, kind of like Seth Godin's The Dip. Have you read that?
Yep.
It's like that size.
Okay.
And they sold incredibly well. I think she published 6 or 7 of them, and now it's a series on Apple.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Like if you went to an agent and you said, I wrote a 50,000 word book that, is like, they're all going to say no. They're going to be like, no, nobody publishes books that short. There's no market for it. No one's going to want to buy it because they're going to lose money on it. And like, no one's going to want to read it because they want to spend the money on like a fuller book. I mean, now Audible is the big problem here because nobody wants to spend a credit on a 2-hour audiobook.
Yeah.
Because for credit, you can also get a 40-hour audiobook, right?
Yeah.
But like they've done really well. And so there are all of these things that the big publishers and stuff will say no to just because of habit and their economics and whatever that can actually be very successful if you do them on your own.
Going to transition over to the Supercast. Thank you guys for listening this far. If you want to listen to Nat talk real shit behind the paywall, go to skmp.supercast.com.